Welcome back to the NutriMedical Report for Wednesday. And, of course, this is an important hour for follow-up on the Wednesday-Thursday meetings last week with Harley SCHLANGER. And Harley was, of course, in meetings in Vienna last week after the Cypriot so-called bail-in, the open policy. And we've got a lot more information on that today regarding that, because apparently the Canadian government are doing basically the same thing. I did some research last night, got more information. And it turns out, talking to Keisha Rogers at the LaRouche office in Houston, they have articles up on LaRouchePAC.com specifically about this, that the Dodd-Frank bill, which is over 3,000 pages, included the same kind of bail-in, basically a literally money grab by the banks to grab capital to go keep themselves solvent. This is a criminal activity. It's sanctioned by the Canadian government now, and it will be in the 2013 budget, so you need to get after your politicians there in Canada. The same thing happened in 2009-10 with the Dodd-Frank bill, and they're just waiting for the next disaster so they can grab your money. Believe it or not, I recommend people go to their credit union and get their money out of banks and speculate, but we need to get the Glass-Steagall Act in immediately. This is an emergency. This is like the building's on fire. You have a fire hose. All you have to do is turn on the water, which is the Glass-Steagall bill. If we do not do this, they're going to empty your bank accounts. Harley, are you there? I guess we don't have Harley yet. So let me read some of this to you. Now, here's the start of it. The article is "The Canadian Deposits as Safe as Cypriot Deposits" by Jeff Berwick at the Activist Post. Rest easy, Canadians, for your bank accounts are going to be made as safe as those bank accounts in Cyprus. Period. That doesn't sound very good. Just take a look at the Canadian government's budget plan for 2013, particularly pages 144 and 145 of the Economic Action Plan 2013. There, the Canadian government promises to use Canadian deposits to save systematically important banks, emphasis ours. The government proposes to implement a bail-in, that's in quotes, regime for systemically important banks. This regime will be designed to ensure that in the unlikely event that a systematic important bank depletes its capital, the bank can be recapitalized and returned to viability through the very rapid conversion of certain bank liabilities into regulatory capital. This will reduce risk for taxpayers. Government will consult tax stakeholders on how best to implement a bail-in regime in Canada. Implementation timelines will allow for a smooth transition for affected institutions, investors, and other market participants. Those bank liabilities that will be allowed to be converted into regulatory capital. Those include customer accounts, apparently bailing out banks with tax money as 2012, now bailing in with customer money are all the rage now. The report says, in quotes, in the likely event, unquote, that one of the banks becomes non-viable, in quotes, how do you think that not having a worry about losses will affect the banker's attitude toward risk, however? Of course, they're going to take more risks because they now know they grab customers' accounts. We'd say that this government-guaranteed ability to raid deposits will make the banks act more recklessly and also guarantee that the deposits will be raided. The big banks in Canada will get to take an enormous risk in pursuit of greater profits for themselves without having to worry about their losses. After all, any losses will now be covered by the bank customers' money that they put in there with the crazy notion that it would be safe from theft. Before you chuckle at the silly Canucks who thought they'd be safe, ask yourself if your bank account is really safe. Because this legal right for the banks to steal deposits is becoming the new normal all across the Western world. It's well known way become the law in Europe as well as early as 2015. The European Commission has already written a draft of law that would protect deposits under 100,000 euros, but which will treat deposits over that amount as capital that can be bailed in or stolen to make up losses. Personally, I cannot understand how anyone in Canada, the U.S., or anywhere in the Western world could think, even for a second, that their money is safe in a bank. Especially these days, the end of the monetary system as we know it is forcing the government and the banks to show their true colors and just outright take people's money. They aren't even bothering to hide their larceny with inflation or borrowing anymore. The banks are the first line of the government corporate offensive against individuals. That's called fascism, the fusion of corporations and government. Keeping our money in the bank at this point is like giving the keys to your house to a family of kleptomaniacs with pyromaniac tendencies. Don't be surprised if all your stuff ends up getting swiped and your house is burned to the ground. Also, due to recent legislative reform, Canadian securities held by those with domicile in Canada can no longer be traded in accounts held in other parts of the world. Non-Canadian banks have been sending letters to their Canadian customers to inform that they must sell or transfer all Canadian securities held in their accounts by April 5th deadline. That's pretty close. So we believe that there will be a lot more slaves in the Western world fleeing out of their currencies into the Bitcoin. Europeans, particularly Spanish, are leading the way. But Americans and Canadians will be forced to start running too. You can also be part of the vanguard who is using technology to avoid government banking fiat currency system altogether by switching from fiat currency to the decentralized digital currency realm with Bitcoin. Now, I think Bitcoin is one of them. I like electronic bartering. I think people should be in silver and gold, but anything other than dollars. We talked about this with Lowell Ponte on Monday in his book, The Great Debasement. And thegreatdebasement.com, the number to call and get that book is 800-630-1494. But it's obvious that we are at the end of the current financial system. So pretty remarkable. It's hard to believe, but it really is happening. Now, I talked to Keisha Rogers. Apparently the 3,000-plus page Dodd-Frank bill basically included all of the same provisions that are already in law in America. So actually America led the way by years before the Cypriot bank bail-in or grabbing people's money. And there's a lot of Americans that got caught in the scheme because they were having foreign bank accounts. There was a list of at least 147 major depositors, primarily Russian oligarchs and mobsters that had advance notice, and people inside that were wealthy within Cyprus. Others, I'm sure, involved with the gun or drug trade that got advance notice. But the Lycos Bank completely collapsed, and many of the people that had deposits in these other banks are going to have a, quote, haircut, they call it. They have all these euphemistic terms. A haircut. I mean, that's a haircut where the blade is so low that your hair is cut off just above the sternum, which means you've been decapitated. There's a big difference. Decapitation is not a haircut. I know I've done and assisted in many autopsies, seen lots of trauma. This is not a haircut. I mean, if you go through the windshield and your head flies in 20 yards in one direction and your body is held inside the vehicle, that's not a haircut. And what the banks are doing right now, they're running scared. We talked about this yesterday. This has obviously been planned long in advance. The reason why there's a, quote, jihad, and that's the actual term by the abominator, the Muslim in the White House, which, of course, has always promised that he's going to support Muslims to pay their tax, which is by Muslim Sharia law necessary, called zakat, and 1/8 of all of the money paid has to go to number 7, which is a Muslim war against the host nation in which they live. So Obama supports zakat, or paying money to make sure they arm and train terrorists inside America. And of course he's showing this with the arming and training and equipment that's been given to the al-Nusra branch of al-Qaeda to do regime change in Syria. So we have a criminal in the White House. We have criminals in the Congress and Senate that have basically not done their job. And we have the Dodd-Frank bill that obviously nobody read, just like the stupid comments from Nancy Pelosi, like the Obamacare bill, where she said, well, you have to pass it, and then you can find out after it's passed, and then read it. I've never heard anything so asinine in my life as the comments that come out of Nancy Pelosi. The woman is a combination of evil, very stupid, and just plain whacked. And when you look at her, you realize that a lot of our politicians are so corrupt that they are preparing for Economageddon. That's why they want their guns. And they want to do whatever disaster they're going to do before a real disaster strikes the planet, because they'll lose control and they won't be able to raid all your bank accounts and steal all the wealth before the civilization collapses. Back in a moment. to the NutriMedical Report. We're having phone trouble connecting. We're having trouble phone connecting with Harley Schlanger in Austria, and we will try to get a hold of Harley if we can, probably by the next break. What I want to do is open up to open lines. We have so many financial issues that are going on here. Of course, we know Obamacare is directly a grab for your money. We know that Obama is basically deconstructing the country. He passed this new bill, by the way, or signed this new bill that allows the forcing a GMO food down your throat. Oregon, of course, is not going along with it. They're going to pass, if not one bill, several bills that'll block it. We have literally a legislative and administrative war going on between Obama and the collectivist globalist banksters, which are criminals, and our state governments fighting against it. This collective, and it's going to get a lot worse. The other thing is, I'd like to talk about the gun issue. I want to bring up all these issues right now. And the call-in number is 800-259-5791, 800-259-5791. Senator Jeff Flake, he said the universal background checks is a bridge too far. Of course, the problem is someone's mentally ill and is a criminal, like Adam Lanza, is going to get guns. Even if they beefed up the system to put everybody in who, quote, is potentially mentally ill. We have seen what happens with the VA system. They've actually put people in the system and threatened them that, in fact, if they try to buy guns or bullets, they're going to be arrested. And they were talking about veterans who have served 1, 2, 3, 4 terms or more that are now injured, retired. Many of them had a transitory adjustment depression, which is now fine. They may have had a physical problem and never had a mental issue, and yet they're getting letters from the VA that are collaborating with Homeland Security to threaten them that if they try to buy guns or bullets. So we now have those lawsuits going with Attorney Michael Connolly, and the organization U.S. Justice Foundation. The U.S. Justice Foundation is fighting these legal cases. So it's very hard to understand why people would not realize this is not a conspiracy theory. It really is very, very real. We also see China doing multi-track attacks on the American currency. They're stockpiling gold now. They've just went up from 2003 to over a million tons of gold. They went up from 300,000 tons to a million tons of gold, buying up gold mines all over the world. Directly linking their currency now to Australia. They've been doing deals with Russia and India, directly a currency exchange to try to get around the U.S. dollar. This is eventually, currency war is eventually going to break out into a real war. China's saber-rattling and doing activities in the South China Sea. North Korea, which is a bad dog of China, never operates except at the behest of the general that sits literally on the neck of Kim Jong-un. So we have a situation where saber-rattling and multi-track, Sensu Art of War games are going on between China and America. And China is playing a very hard deal that's going to get them into very big trouble. The Sensu philosophy, especially when you're dealing with America and the West, is not going without full analysis, and America and the West are many steps ahead of them. The Russians, of course, could stop the transfer of oil and gas to Europe. But they're not going to bail out their own savers in Russia. That includes a lot of the rich Russians that are maybe not part of the upper echelon. Many of the high-level Russians did get their advance notice of that. Beijing, of course, is printing so much currency in the last year, they've doubled their amount of currencies. So that situation is way out of control. David Stockman made a recent statement that the Fed's fire hoses started spraying an elephant soup of liquidity injections in every direction. $1.3 trillion in 13 weeks compared to $850 billion during the first 94 years of America. So convinced that the Fed, this is, in the last 100 years, that the Fed is flying by the seat of its pants. So right now, we now know what the ratios are that with the Glass-Steagall bill, it will kill the bond market. And of course, the banks have now said if the bond market is linked to their liquidity, they're going to start seizing customers' assets in the banks. So I strongly recommend everybody move their money into either gold and silver, which they possess personally, not in a safety deposit box because they can grab your guns in gold and silver, and to basically local credit unions. Because if your bank is speculating on the bond market or derivatives like the Bank of America and other large banks, you're going to get ripped. You need to understand that. The banks, if the bond market goes, because of these things happening, we're going to have a collapse. And I believe it's going to happen sooner rather than later, and this will be parallel with almost certainly an airborne plague. And that airborne plague, I've been saying for years, will be the entry point for all the operations that have been passed on through Dr. Osterholm, Council on Foreign Relations member, University of Minnesota top virologist in America dealing with avian swine flu, and published recently, just a month ago, that the preparations for this are absolutely abominable, that the flu vaccine doesn't work, and there's no public health policies that are going to protect the public. They want plausible deniability to make sure it looks like it's a spontaneous event, but we know this is a laboratory recombinant. U.S. is, of course, sending F-22 stealth jets over South Korea. They have U-2 bombers. They have a missile destroyer over there now in the area off of South Korea. It's a hair trigger away from a war, and people don't understand that these things are very real, that I expect a meltdown of the bond market to occur relatively soon. It could occur by the summer or even before. It could be delayed to the fall, but it's going to happen. And when the bond market goes, especially, they're going to grab people's money and people are going to lose it. We will see also hyperinflation at the same time as a food collapse, because most of the major food producers in the world have had major collapses in crops over the last year, which is why a lot of animals have been slaughtered. So you're going to see the price of meat and main food staples go through the ceiling. If you're not prepared and you don't have something like aquaponics, some food storage, a garden in your place, water storage, ability to protect yourself, and do not, under any circumstances, even under threat, hand in your guns. Don't. And look over the 10-plus list, and you'll see that we have also some unconventional weapons, some plans which you can look up yourself, but I gave some basic information which I'll continue to upgrade on the 10-plus list. It's on the front page of NutriMedical.com. You need to realize we're blowing the trumpet now, the shofar, telling you that the battle is on. We have the Jebusites, the Amalekites, the Hivites, the Hittites, etc. All the ites are now out there, and we are thick into a real war. We're in the currency war phase. We're in the grab your bank accounts phase. We're in the forced vaccine phase. We're in the Obamacare eugenics phase. We're in the phase where the banks are ready to force governments to grab all your guns, because the next things are so noxious, they don't want an armed public when they do the next thing that they want to do. And ultimately, their real goal is mass genocide and population reduction. Anybody who believes otherwise is a fool, and I'll say it right to your face, you're a fool, and your belief system actually is lethal and dangerous for the rest of us. So China's reporting new human deaths from this new rare strain called H7N9, not the H7N3, which is the one in Mexico. And we're seeing the Pope calling for a peace treaty in the Middle East, which is the final Pope by the Malachi prophecies. We'll be talking about that in hour 3 with Dr. Bob Thiel. It's really quite remarkable, but all these things really are happening. It's not a joke. It really is happening. So I hope to get back on my line, Harley Schlanger, in just a moment when I contact her myself, because we're having troubles with the studio to get a hold of Harley, but I'll get him at the bottom of the hour here.
72, our volunteer.
Well, welcome back, and we're going to be joined in a moment with Harley Schlanger. We're trying to do some fancy scrambling here. We have Harley now?
Yes.
Oh, good, Harley. This news is awful, but not unexpected. It's like the news that you knew that the economic phase of World War I was coming, leading to a war, and that the abnormal and the unfair agreement that was set up after World War I was going to lead to World War II and the rise of Nazi Germany. Everything that we're seeing, like the invasion of the Sudetenland, the conflict with North and South Korea, the saber rattling, the currency wars with China, the situation with Cyprus, the bills that are being put in the Canadian Parliament, the Dodd-Frank bill that Keisha Rogers told me about, 2009-10, 3,000-page bill, that includes basically the Cypriotization, the bail-in, open policy to grab people's deposits to maintain liquidity of these banks. They basically don't have any fear now of anything, because they can gamble and know they'll always be bailed out.
Well, let me give you the full picture that we've put together in the last 24 hours. out of our Wiesbaden, Germany office on this bail-in proposal, where it came from. Because this shows that they knew right away that sooner or later there would be a huge blowback to the quantitative easing and the TARP and the public bailouts. And they went as long as they thought they could get away with that. But back in 2009, 2010, when the Dodd-Frank bill was being written, there was a report prepared by the FDIC, that is the U.S. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Bank of England, in which they put forward the proposal that's now known as bail-in. And what they said essentially boils down to this. I'm not going to go through all the technical details because some of them they're like derivatives. You don't really get much from explaining them. But what they essentially say is that when you put money in a bank, it's no longer your money. That, in a sense, your savings and checking accounts are investments made in a bank. Now, if you didn't know that when you put your money in, can they take your money now? Now, they're saying, of course they can, because they're saying the banks take risks in order to safeguard their depositors. But that's not the nature of banking under the old regulatory system. That's
a
part
complete
of the
change of the nature of the
that occurred with Dodd-Frank.
Yeah, there's no notification.
They're now saying that a checking and a savings account, when you deposit money, that's the equivalent of an unsecured investment.
My gosh.
And so this was initially proposed by the Bank of England and the FDIC. They thought it was too wild to even consider. But then the London Economist in 2010, I can't remember the date, I think it was September 2010, had an article about it that no one paid any attention to because it just sounded so wild, but it was written by two people from UBS Bank of Switzerland, which essentially got caught stealing their depositors' money. Now, this then evolved over 2012. In January 2012, there was a report put out by the Financial Security Board of England saying that this is something that could be done to avoid the problems of continued quantitative easing. But then this is what emerged in the middle of March 2013, just 2 weeks ago, when it appeared that the two largest banks of Cyprus would go under without a bailout. Now, the reason they're in trouble is they've been given 55 billion euros in loans from the European Central Bank to cover their exposure in bad debt in Greek banks, Greek bonds, and Italian banks. So this is a classic example. The European Central Bank, through quantitative easing, gave money to these two Cypriot banks, 55 billion euros, to cover their losses. And in return, they gave the Greek bonds and the Greek bank debt to the European Central Bank. Now, there's no way they can pay the European Central Bank back. So the European Central Bank came up with a plan, which is a short-term plan, to cover 10 billion of that 55 billion, which is that they would give about 4 billion in a new turnover loan, but the banks would have to come up with 5.7 billion on their own. And this is where the bail-in went into effect. They said, basically, take it from your depositors. So that's what the Cyprus situation is. It's not about Cyprus. It's not about a test case. This is, as the new head of the European Commission, a Danish guy whose name I haven't learned to pronounce yet, or a Dutch guy, actually, he said this is the new template. In other words, this is what will be done. Now, immediately, a top official at Commerzbank, which is the second largest bank in Germany, said that Italy is going to have to do the same thing for its banking system. And as soon as that happened, there was a run on the bank of Monte dei Paschi Bank, and their stock fell 7% yesterday. A leading Spanish economist talked to Wolfgang Munchau, who's the top economics writer for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, or I'm sorry, for the Financial Times. And Munchau wrote that this economist said, this is going to happen in Spain. Why would anybody leave their money in a Spanish bank knowing this is going to happen? Now, of course, the way they keep money in the bank is what they did in Cyprus. Capital controls. They don't let you take it out. So you're trapped.
Right.
Now, is there anyone in your listening audience that doesn't think they'll do this in the United States?
Of course they will.
Of course they will. And they'll justify it by saying that, look, people don't like public bailouts. They don't like the federal government giving money to banks. But the banks, especially when the banks already have money. Now, you know what this reminds me of? This is something you and I have talked about a lot. This so-called means testing for Medicare. That the argument that you shouldn't get the government to pay for your health care as long as you have any assets, like a house. So that under means testing, which Obama is pushing, you would have to sell your house to pay for surgery before Medicare would pay a penny. Now, where would you live after your surgery? This is the Nazi genocide policy that LaRouche has been warning about in banking, in health care, across the board. And this is the policy coming from London, and there are people in the U.S., including Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, both of them are out of the Congress now, but their Dodd-Frank monstrosity lives on. This is why they don't want Glass-Steagall, because they want to be able to steal every last penny they can get.
Exactly. In other words, this is, by the way, I reported this yesterday, and I have confirmation. The Canadian government's doing the same legislation. Page 144 and 145 of the Economic Action Plan 2 in 2013. They're doing the exact same thing to systematically protect banks by grabbing depositors' money. And they're putting this in now. They did it in the Dodd-Frank bill. I believe this is a systemic, multinational bankster grab depositors' money, and this basically is the end of the economic order as we know it. I don't think we have to wait much longer.
One of my associates said they're going from quantitative easing to quantitative stealing.
Right. What it means basically is move your money into anything other than dollars. Do not leave it in any bank except for local credit unions. Have money, only sufficient monies to run your business or your home. Have as much cash, coin, and other means of exchange. Expect in the next weeks and months that they will start seizing money. And the sequence of events I've heard from all my experts is that we expect the bond market will collapse shortly. When they do that, the systemically important, or banks that they're called in Canada and elsewhere here in America, they'll then allow bailing in. This is going to is already passed as part of the Dodd-Frank bill and the bill in Canada, and across Europe they'll do the same thing. They will grab hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of depositors.
Actually, they're saying in the European banking system, they're saying there's about 3.7 trillion, and so far quantitative easing has been about 4 trillion. So they're saying that they can match what they've put out so far by central banks just by the 20% levy of deposits over 100,000 euros. Now, here's something interesting. A lot of people might think, well, 100,000 euros, those people aren't hurting too bad. A lot of those accounts are family businesses.
Exactly.
And small
kill business.
And what happens
so in other words,
when
we're
they
heading
get
toward
a tax like that?
And by the way, cash affecting cash flow.
They can't pay their bills.
Keep that thought. We're on break now, Harley.
NutraMedical.com.
Exactly, no benefit at all. Say that, because we've got to get Glass-Steagall in. This is now the final call.
It's a war measure.
Yeah, the war measure. Welcome back, and Harley, this is now, 5-alarm fire. I want people out there to realize the last few nights I've had about 3 hours a night sleep because I've been in what's called, my spidey sense, I'm in what's called alarm mode. Every fiber of my being tells me something catastrophic is literally just around the corner. Last night I got up at 4 o'clock and I couldn't sleep at all the rest of the night. And I was literally have had panic attacks the last few nights because I am very intuitive, and when I know some danger is coming, I'm like, it's my human instinct inside that's very, very tuned up to say something horrifying is coming. We see all the signs now. We see the government literally going crazy on a jihad literally against guns. We see the government putting in policies like this to grab your deposits in banks. The kind of disaster that's coming will exceed by orders of magnitude the 1929 collapse. It will exceed the Lombardy collapse. And you know that the government and the international order are actually putting together things like airborne plagues because they want to collapse civilization. They don't just want to grab your money and get control. They want you dead. They want to cause death of billions. Their whole idea is to reduce the population by 90%. And when people say, Dr. Deagle, you're just exaggerating this, I talked to Dr. Isley from the World Constitution Parliament Association. He told me straight up exactly what their plans are. About barium salts and aluminum, thorium and aluminum in the upper atmosphere, about their weaponized programs to try to reduce population, about vaccine programs that Bill Gates is doing. I have so much corroboration, including documents right out of the Basel headquarters of the World Health Organization, given to me by doctors that smuggled them out and gave them to me on March 16th, 97. I can tell you, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the, oh my God, right in your face facts. And anybody now who used to think that this is a conspiracy theory, how about this? How about you go to use your ATM card and your bank account's been emptied? How about this? You have controls that you can't extract more than so much money per day, even in accounts that are so-called insured. How about this, where a government decides that they've got bank holidays and martial law, and you are now going to have a tracker chip, and they're going to have forced vaccines because of an airborne plague. And by the way, if you don't take all the shots or all the drugs, you're not even going to get health care. That's what they do in the VA hospital.
Let me give you a picture on this thing, just to go back to this question of the theft operation. You know, the basic situation we're dealing with is that the banking system is bankrupt. They cannot cover the debt in 150, 200 years. And so there's an element among the very clever practical guys who are saying, we've got to at least come up with a little bit more time, we've got to come up with a little more money, let's use this bail-in process. And they put out the story that, look, in Cyprus, people with deposits were getting 4 and 5%, where in the United States you're getting 0.22% or something like that. So really, isn't this unfair? So now this is just a measure of fairness. Or they say, well, $300 a day, that's enough to live on. Well, these are coming from accounts of people who run businesses. You can't run a business on $300 a day on an ATM. This is a policy designed to destroy a national economy. Now, Cyprus is under attack now, but so is Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. They're going through the same effect. And there's just a story in Lancet today to make the point that you were just making that said that the austerity policies not only are not helping the banks or the economy, but they're killing seniors and poor people at accelerating rates. Now, that's in Lancet. That's not, a dime store tabloid. That's the leading British medical journal saying that these austerity policies are killing people. Now, Prince Philip, who was the creator of the World Wildlife Fund, along with a former Nazi named Prince Bernhard, Prince Philip has said he would like to be reincarnated as a deadly virus to eliminate excess populations. Right. And the World Wildlife Fund, which was, uses the panda as its logo, and it tries to make you feel all cuddly about animals, they were created by rabid genocidalists, just like Margaret Sanger, who set up the the Birth Control Council. Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist who wanted to wipe out black and non-white populations. George Bush Sr., or actually George Bush Sr.'s father, Prescott Bush, was funding the Nazis in the 30s and 40s. His bank was seized in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act. So there are genocidalists out there who are using banking for short-term profits, but they know that the key to banking is not the short-term profits, but the control of credit. Who controls credit? Because that can make or break nations. And the only solution is what Lyndon LaRouche has been insisting on, Glass-Steagall, because that would stop the financial institutions from looting. It would force them into bankruptcy protection, and you would then have the power taken away from them at a point of a meltdown of the system. So instead of leaving credit in the hands of these private swindlers and thieves, it would be put in the hand of an elected government. Now, it's our job to make sure that government does the right thing.
Right. The situation, though, is final hour. This is, people need to understand this, the globalists have every intention of using advanced life extension technologies, robotics, etc. They want to eliminate most of the population. They'll pop out all these advanced technologies they've built up over the last century and longer. They will not have solutions to environmental issues like Fukushima Daiichi, which they're totally ignoring. They will continue to foist on the population dangerous technologies like genetically modified food, which Obama, by the way, signed this bill, the literally Monsanto Protection Act. Yeah, right. We have a basically a Muslim who's now pushing zakat, which is basically the payment of tax, and 1/7 of it, 1/8 of it has to go toward a jihad against the populations of the country in which they're now living. We have a situation where international bankers allied with the Islam and with the international globalist satanic elite are literally now craving mass murder on a scale that even make the 300 million plus that died in the 20th century look like a party. This is going to be, if we don't stand up and fight it, the final Donnybrook. This is the final battle for humanity. Because if we don't fight this, we're going to have a Gattaca-style situation where most of humanity will be wiped out. A small drone class will be made that will be unisex. Human beings will only be able to reproduce in laboratories under government guidance. And the power elite will have cybernetic and genetic enhancements to have extended lifespans, literally owning everything. And everywhere on Earth will be giant, if you want to call it, estates owned by globalist elite that literally will control everything. That's where this is all going. People don't understand their ultimate goal is mass murder. And
but the other thing people need to understand is they're stupid and immoral and can be defeated. And
right.
They were beaten before. The American Revolution, we beat them. The Civil War,
right.
They were beaten. World War
right.
II, they were beaten. And
right.
every time the globalists have been beaten, it's been when we've gone back to the principles of the Constitution that put people ahead of private interests like banks and insurance companies. That's
right.
what we have to do today, because those banks and insurance companies, even under their own actuarial standards, are bankrupt. But right. The problem is that they control the accounting. They control the Congress. They control the lawmaking. And we've got to take it back. But you're really right. The time is short. You look at North Korea. You look at the Syrian situation. The Russians are doing everything they can to say, look, cut this crap out because we could end up with a nuclear war. By the way, let me mention one other thing. You know where the safest banks in the world may be right now? Russia.
Yeah. Well, the Russians aren't going to put up with this. They know that this currency war is a war to the death. They've already been through glasnost and perestroika that followed after the bank attacks on there. By the way, the collapse of the Soviet Union was not a military operation, it was a financial one. And people need to understand that they have put a movie out with Tom Hanks about it, talking about how they engineered the collapse of the Soviet Union. What's going on right now with the West and with Europe is all engineered by the bankers, but this goal is not just a collapse so they can get control and become the leading first world nation, the United States and Europe. No, this one now, they're getting ready for mass genocide. This is
and people can go to the LaRouchePAC.com to get the details on this.
Yeah, articles.
LaRouchePAC.com.
Too big to close. Those who voted for Dodd-Frank are in deposit robbery. British Empire strategies on saving their system by killing you. Amazing article. European Commission has planned to use deposits to bail in failing banks since June 2012. And death in Cyprus. Are you next? Yes. The answer is yes. Don't think that these announcements should be taken lightly. This is like the announcement that we're at the beginning of World War III, and the final phases going from a currency war to a hot war are very close.